Okay, given the nature of the subject, right, I'm going through and sort of overviewing the book, The Atheist's Guide to Reality, Enjoying Life Without Illusions. We're going to develop that subtitle in a moment. But seeing this is our study, I'm not going to pray today, because... No, let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, it's probably good for us to be alert to belief systems that in various ways pose a challenge directly or indirectly to our confession that Jesus Christ is the Lord and that He is the Savior of all who believe. And so we do pray that in our stewardship of the gospel, that we may learn with prudence what those who are around us hold to be true, that we might know them better, we may know why they believe what they believe and live the way they live, and that we might, once again, with wisdom, tailor our message to meet them where they're at without in any way sacrificing the content of our glorious gospel. And so we do pray that in its own way this study may be edifying, and we pray for your blessing upon us as we think together about these things. We ask this through Christ. Amen. All right, I'm just pretty much going to jump in where I left off. We're talking about nihilism, and remember, most of what I say is a comment or a description of Rosenberg's view. So Rosenberg represents a way of thinking. You might even say it's the logical extension of some very fundamental presuppositions. But he's not speaking for everybody everywhere who holds to Scientism or has a materialist view of the world or other related isms. But he writes kind of in a provocative way and in a challenging way and in an accessible way that I think makes him particularly worth interacting with. So, nihilism states that all moral judgments are wrong because, quote, they are all based on false, groundless presuppositions. So now we're kind of getting somewhere. And he goes on to say, nihilism denies that there is really any such thing as intrinsic moral value. People think that there are things that are intrinsically valuable, not just as a means to something else, human life or the ecology of the planet, or the master race, or elevated states of consciousness, for example. But nothing can have that sort of intrinsic value, the very kind of value morality requires. Nihilism denies that there is anything at all that is good in itself or, for that matter, bad in itself. Therefore, nihilism can't be accused of advocating the moral goodness of, say, political violence or anything else. And so here, Rosenberg is helping us look at reality square in the face. And he puts it out there very straightforwardly, right? He's not trying to slip it in on the side. He says, Scientism can't avoid nihilism. We need to make the best of it. Well, of course, this poses no small problem for us Homo sapiens, right? I don't think we as a species can solve it, but we can look to our own development, that is via natural selection, for some guidance. And it comes to us, says Rosenberg, in what he calls a core morality, which almost all of us Homo sapiens share. A more accurate way to think about core morality begins by recognizing those norms that no one has ever bothered to formulate because they never come into dispute. Okay, so there are norms that are as close to universal as norms get, and therefore it's not necessary to sort of stand up for them or define oneself by them because they're not even in dispute. They might even be difficult to formulate if they cover every contingency and exclude all exceptions. If we set out to express them, we might start out with candidates like these. And he provides us a list, a partial list, right? He says we might set out to express them with candidates like these of core moral values. Don't cause gratuitous pain to a newborn baby, especially your own. Protect your children. If someone does something nice to you, then, other things being equal, you should return the favor if you can. Other things being equal, people should be treated the same way. On the whole, people's being better off is morally preferable than to their being worse off. Beyond a certain point, self-interest becomes selfishness. If you earn something, you have a right to it. It's permissible to restrict complete strangers' access to your personal possessions. It's okay to punish people who intentionally do wrong. It's wrong to punish the innocent. And so it's not quite the 10 Commandments, right? But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, there are 10. I wonder if he did that on purpose. Now, I want to take a little side trail here because it's about the word morality, right? Because as I see it, in order to claim a core morality, the author has to use the word morality in a way that can pass sympathetic scrutiny, that is from peers, but probably won't persuade someone with a religious perspective. Okay, I want to make sure you're all following me here. Is this making sense? There's problems with his core morality, obviously, and even from within the scientism that depends on evolution and natural selection, there are problems with this, right? One of them being protect your children. Most cultures, historically speaking, have in one way or another, including ours, allowed mothers and fathers to deal with unwanted children in a way that seemed good to them and to their material circumstances, right? Yes? No?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're talking about like abortion or...
For us, it's abortion, and well, abortion isn't new, but it also meant throughout history that undesirable children had to be dealt with. And they tended to be dealt with when they were newborn. It might be because of weakness, deformity, gender selection.
Okay, so dealt with means eliminate.
Eliminate.
Okay.
Right. So there is a dimension of not quite natural selection in culling one's own herd, but it is present in cultures across the world and across history. Right. Recently in China. Same thing in the subcontinent. What do you want if you're depending on your children to take care of you in your old age? Do you want girls or boys? Yeah, for sure, right? And Well, I'm not going to go into all of it. All I'm saying is it's disputable, some of the core moral values. But rather than do that, I'd rather concede them for the sake of the argument. He goes on to say, there is good reason to think that there is a moral core that is almost universal to almost all humans. That's a really kind of a non-committal sentence there. Among competing core moralities, it was the one that somehow came closest to maximizing the average fitness of our ancestors over a long enough period that became almost universal. For all we know, the environment to which our core morality constitutes an adaptation is still with us. Let's hope so, at any rate, since our core morality is almost surely locked in by now, and he means locked in genetically. If you are in doubt about this point, you are in good company. Or rather, you were until the 50 years of research in behavioral biology, cognitive social psychology, evolutionary game theory, and paleoanthropology. Until the recent past, no one thought that core morality was selected for. Now science knows better. If you are in doubt about this matter, the next chapter shows how natural selection made core morality inevitable. It's the key to taking the sting out of the unavoidable nihilism that this chapter is about to establish. And so you can see that Rosenberg here is working very hard to make two arguments that certainly on the surface, and then even with some special attention, seem to contradict each other. And he knows that. He's not trying to pull a fast one. And that's one reason I like the book. He knows that our species desperately needs morality, but where can we or it get it? Historically, human beings assumed a God or a set of gods who provided a transcendent and fixed, though occasionally flexible, standard for right and wrong. Now, that standard may have been loosely or strictly applied by the worshipers, but nevertheless, there was some agreed upon standard that originated outside of us and provided a certain restraint on our excesses, certain way to order our community. They aren't universal necessarily, but there you are. And there are two good reasons for this. The first is that moral relativism is unacceptable because a society cannot cohere if everyone does what is right in his or her own eyes. And, along with that, the threat of divine retribution implies that these are my thoughts, by the way, not Rosenberg's. The threat of divine retribution implies that people cannot, in the last analysis, escape justice. God's vengeance is certain, even if human justice systems fall short. There was a popular sitcom in the 1970s called Maude. Anyone remember Maude? And one of the taglines from it was, "God will get you for that, Walter." Now, I think Maude was an atheist, but that thought, even if it's a laugh line, touches on something in the human experience that says there needs to be, we really have to have some sense that justice isn't settled in the here and now because there is so much injustice that goes unpunished. But scientism, of course, doesn't accept the existence of God, capital G, of God, lowercase g, or gods, right? So we'll consider the important role that religion played in human evolution at another time. If anybody ever wants me to do another book, maybe you'll say, no, this is pretty good, we'll stick with this one and call it a day. But the short of it is, our ancestors needed religion to answer those persistent questions, and really just about every other question about the world and the way things work in it. And our ancestors needed religion to provide structure, organization, and purpose for their people groups, as well as sets of defining norms, rituals, taboos, and whatever else contributed to the group's identity. The Enlightenment started the human race on the path of rational inquiry based on our senses, our observation, experimentation, and from Newton, the laws of physics. Thus, as it came over time, the God is dead slogan. The God is dead slogan wasn't necessarily an announcement of radical atheism. It was, I think at least in Nietzsche's version, a recognition that now we're on our own and we're going to have to make do with the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Okay, so in other words, from Nietzsche's point of view, as far as I understand it, it's a scary proposition. The scariness of it doesn't mean we won't accept it, but it puts us in a precarious place. It's as if we've all lived in Mom's house for the last who knows how many thousands of years, and now we're out of it without a job, without a place to live, without a place to sleep, right? And we're going to have to make our own meaning in the world. So, this is progress, and you all agree with that to a certain degree, right? Is it wrong to perform autopsies? Is it wrong, Dr. Brooks, did you ever have to look at a cadaver and see how the Catholic Church forbid that at one time for religious reasons? Can we say that it's progress to study the human body in order to understand how it works? Yeah, really, yeah, especially for George. George would be living in the Middle Ages still, but you would have died of the plague, so it wouldn't have been a problem. So by desacralizing the world and increasingly secularizing the world, which is what the Enlightenment did, we were ready to be unleashed upon the world to study how it works, right? At every level, in every nook and cranny, to the microscopic level, to the universe, without shutting down inquiry for reasons of sacred devotion. At the same time, this left us with a gaping hole in human morality. The science that led us here, it seems to me, is now the scientism that's trying to figure out how to plug the hole while remaining consistent with its presuppositions. Now, there are those in science who claim, look, it's just not the scientist's job to do that. We're just observers and describers. We're not here to give moral advice. Okay, fair enough. It seems like a little bit of a cop-out, but I still appreciate the science. So they pawn it off on either philosophers or perhaps the popular expression now, very generic faith leaders, right? But this gets those scientists off the hook. As I tell anyone I'm arguing with, even if I occasionally drop in on a YouTube discussion, deconstruction is the easiest thing in the world to do. right? I can tear apart any system with a relish. It's construction that is so difficult. And so you can sit there and, put your fingers in your ears and stick your tongue out and say, that's stupid, but you have anything to replace it, right? This is why revolutions historically typically fail, and why I'm an apologist for what the Founding Fathers did after the American Revolution. They really set about to create a system. It was easy, if you will, to tear down empire. It was an enormous challenge to replace it with something that they thought could actually work. I'm not defending or promoting any views. I just think that was a remarkable effort, historically speaking. So building requires enormous amounts of effort. Okay, so I'm still operating within sort of my thoughts here. And I want to add to this discussion that the word moral, or morals, or morality, those are all terribly imprecise for a discussion like this one, because we all use the word and we all know what it means until we try to define it. Okay, so here is Webster on the word moral. Of or relating to principles of right and wrong in behavior, that is, ethical, expressing or teaching a conception of right behavior, conforming to a standard of right behavior, sanctioned by or operative on one's conscience or ethical judgment, capable of right and wrong action. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple. And the word morality, a moral, literary, a doctrine or system of moral conduct, conformity to ideals of right human conduct, moral conduct. These are all other ways of saying it. So we're all throwing around this word in the larger conversation in the society, right? Things are moral. It's immoral to do that. It's morally right that we do X, Y, Z. But the word all by itself, even if it continues to carry some moral weight, is not a very helpful word in public conversation. So just an ever slight detour here, courtesy of the British philosopher John Gray. What I'm challenging here is the very notion of using the word moral or morality in debate, discussion, reflection, and so on. Atheists attack Christian values, says Gray, because they are changeable and often contradictory. And he bases this point on a critical observation made by the Oxford philosopher Richard Robinson, who makes a credible point, at least about morals in the Bible being changeable. I don't think they're contradictory. There's obviously a difference between Israel under the law, right, and the church. There are things that we just don't do anymore that were required for Israel as the people of God. In incessant mawkish debates, says Gray, they, the atheists, insist that unbelievers can be highly moral people. It does not occur to them to ask which morality an atheist should follow. And this is why the word is so useless, even if it still carries weight. Like Robinson's Christians, they are confident that everyone knows what atheist values must be. So you can use the word, right? This is moral. It may not be illegal, but it's immoral. What morals? Which ones are we talking about? And Gray, who's an atheist, is attacking fellow atheists for assuming that there is this thing called morality and that everyone else just sort of recognizes it when the word is used. And so what he says next illustrates his point to make sure that he's not just reasoning in an abstract way. In this, as so much else, they, the atheists, are mistaken. Karl Marx and the Russian anarchist Mikhail Bakunin rejected theism because it was an obstacle to human solidarity. The German egoist Max Stirner because it restricted individual self-assertion, and Friedrich Nietzsche because it promoted slave virtues like humility. Some 18th century atheists, such as the physician Julien Offray de la Mettrie, recommended the enjoyment of sexual pleasures. Most English atheists at the time and later were horrified by any defense of sensuality. The mid-Victorian philosopher John Stuart Mill looked forward to a time when Christianity would be replaced by something like Comte's religion of humanity. But Mill shared with Christians of his time the conviction that life should be devoted to mental and moral self-improvement rather to enjoyment of physical pleasures. There have been many atheist moralities, and this is coming from an atheist. Let's keep going for another paragraph from Gray, because I want to get his one-sentence conclusion at the end. With few exceptions, 21st century atheists are unthinking liberals. But atheism has no specific political content, and many atheists have been virulently anti-liberal. 18th century French philosophers, including Voltaire, as we will see, endorsed views that can only be described as racist. Charles Maurras, the early 20th century French atheist and chief theorist of the fascist Action Française movement, revered the Catholic Church as a bastion of social order. The 19th century biologist Ernst Haeckel, who was hailed as the German Darwin, invented an evolutionary religion called monism, in which ideas of racial hierarchy played a prominent part. Julius Huxley, one of the founding fathers of evolutionary humanism in 20th century Britain, endorsed similar racial theories before the Second World War. Typically, concludes Gray, exponents of scientific ethics have merely endorsed the conventional values of their time. Did you get that last sentence? Typically, exponents of scientific ethics, and he puts that in quotation marks, have merely endorsed the conventional values of their time. That's a fantastic insight from an atheist philosopher. And I might have used this illustration before, but I was watching Dawkins. He did a documentary on religion, obviously against it. Richard Dawkins, the British biologist, and he basically set up a field of straw men so that he could knock them down. It was just pathetic. But at one point, because it's a lengthy attack on religion, I should have looked this up because I'd like to get the references. He's sitting in a cafe in Europe, I think. And he's talking to the camera, and he says, "Just think." And he's attacking religion. He's just think that 2 generations ago, that people who are homosexual and people of different races would not have been able to sit in this cafe like we're doing today. And that's religion's fault. And I'm thinking, so? Why is that wrong? Why is it wrong? And this is what Gray is saying. Exponents of scientific ethics have merely endorsed the conventional values of their time. So Dawkins knows who he's talking to. He's talking to the choir. He's talking to people who are, at various levels, irreligious or suspicious of religious, but he's appealing to basically a conventional value of the time. as if to say, look how wise we are over and against these wacky religious people who have been controlling the world. Isn't it freeing to be outside the dominion of these medieval religions? And I thought, well, thank you.
It's hard to think of any people group that wasn't promoting the views of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even the Christian, other religions, even people we like have the views of the day that were.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is we'll see from Rosenberg, I often point to racism as being one of the issues du jour. I have no problem with challenging racism. It is an ugly thing from a Christian point of view. I don't know how you can love your neighbor as yourself and be a racist. But it is a part of natural selection. Tribalism and racial hierarchies are a byproduct of evolution. And Rosenberg has to contend with that. It's like, well, okay, not everything in the sort of scientific morality is worth preserving. But we are selected to be tribal and thus, well, racist, right? That's what we would call human nature. So, any questions about that? In fact, I've got it here in my footnote. I'm enjoying doing this, so I've worked way ahead. I forgot I had this footnote. It's Rosenberg's observation. There are lots of moral values and ethical norms that Enlightenment people, and I threw in except Voltaire, reject, but which Mother Nature has strongly selected for. Racism and xenophobia are optimally adapted to maximize the representation of your genes in the next generation instead of some stranger's genes. Consider the almost universal patriarchal norms of female subordination. They are all the result of Darwinian processes. So why aren't they a part of the core morality?
Is he saying that positively, the footnote?
No. He's conceding it as a consistent practitioner of scientism. What he's doing is he's basically endorsing the conventional values of our time. Patriarchy seems to me to be the most natural outworking of evolution that we could imagine.
So not religion, so to speak.
No, I'm talking about at the level of pure genetic development.
Right.
What is more universal, if you will, than patriarchy?
Even in the animal kingdom.
Even in the animal kingdom. Now, to say something is universal doesn't mean there are no exceptions. It simply means that if you were to survey human history and the world of mammals, you would no doubt find that there are basic realities that govern communities that in one way or another depend on patriarchy, right? And any problem with that? But what do you do when you're trying to sell a moral system that's free of religious values to a society that hates patriarchy? Or that hates racism, even though he recognizes that Mother Nature has strongly selected for it because racism and xenophobia are optimally adapted. This is a huge problem, and I think Rosenberg knows this. He's not trying to pull a fast one. There's a quotation from Voltaire that I've never been able to find from Voltaire. So it's ascribed to him, but I can't find... The quotation is good all by itself. In other words, that Voltaire said, Of course there is no God. But don't tell my manservant that, or he'll murder me in my sleep. You could laugh at that because that's very clever. In other words, he needs to fall back on the moral systems of medieval religion to protect himself from people who would realize that they were living a subordinate life, and if they're free from moral constraints, as Voltaire is arguing, will act out with the dagger or the knife. Okay? So, any questions or comments so far?
That last comment by Voltaire kind of suggests...
Supposedly.
Yes.
It's apocryphal.
That there's this element of kind of elitism.
Absolutely.
And it's like, we need to implement all of this and sort of lie about it because nobody really wants to accept it, or the common people don't want to.
Right.
But we need to do it for their own good.
Exactly. And credit to Rosenberg, who's not responding to Voltaire, of course, but what he's saying is, this really needs to become the way we think about our lives in the world. It's the next step in our release from the shackles of religion, and Scientism is ready for it if you are man enough, right, brave enough to take it on. But yes, he concedes there are some problems going forward. And remember what I said last week, I would see this as an apologetic wedge, or if you will, an apologetic foot in the door, so that dealing with people, respecting their humanity, they don't know they're in the image of God, but we do, and they sort of present an argument with moral passion, which they're not entitled to if they're being consistent with their own presuppositions. And you can ask very respectfully, why are you so confident in your belief system? Where does the confidence come from? I asked that to someone some of you know, who went on to get a PhD in Old Testament and is now a published biblical scholar, though he rejects Christianity. I was having a conversation with him one night, and we were talking about Christianity, and he sort of passionately advocating a position. I said, why are you so confident in that position? What's it based on? And he had to concede that that's a problem. And I think people will concede that they have a problem when you redirect it, not antagonistically, because that just turns the temperature up, but respectfully, and say, where's this passion coming from? Because if I work within your parameters, this isn't really allowable, right? People really still want to believe, against Rosenberg's challenge, that their lives have value and are meaningful. And Rosenberg is saying, sorry, no. But we still need to get along. So you say, where is this coming from? Or, why do you think that? Because really, according to the way you view the world, there's nothing very special about you or me, right? And that doesn't mean Christianity is true right off the bat, but it does suggest that their confidence in the system, the thinking in which they operate, may be misplaced. And all the answers are not so neat and tidy after all. And so a better word for morals at this point might be rules, right? Because rules defined are a prescribed guide for conduct or action. Rules don't necessarily depend on anything transcendent, right? So a basketball fan and a baseball fan can argue about the rules all day long, But if they fail to realize that they are arguing about two entirely different sports, then rules is useless to them. So in the same way, in moral debate, what's left if there's no longer any context or guiding principles that debaters can agree upon up front? And this, I think, is where we get an insight into culture, right? We have moral debate, but if there's no larger context or guiding principles that the debaters can agree on up front, what is left? Shaming, intimidation, threats, and ultimately violence, right? Because historically, violence is necessary for one group to impose its belief system on the other group. So drop the word moral and let's just call it a rules debate. What rules are we going to live by? And let's agree up front that there are no transcendent rules. It's like a baseball game. A baseball game would be chaotic if it didn't matter how many balls or strikes a batter had, right? You'd be making, it's Calvin ball. So, we can no longer culturally say that we hold these truths to be self-evident. To modern hearers, that's all stuff and nonsense. And what makes that statement even worse is it's followed by the ultimately absurd statement that all men are created equal. What could be sillier than the idea that people are created and are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights? I always thought Jefferson was brilliant to put that in there, because now he had a way to say, here's why we can reject England and its king, because there's a higher authority than the divine right of kingship, and that is the Creator. And he's given us rights, and this king, divine right or not, has been trampling all over them, and therefore we're entitled to declare our independence. It was great to bring God into that conversation. It was absolutely necessary. But now we moderns know better. I'm being facetious there.
And his reference to God wasn't necessarily the biblical God, but more
Oh, yeah, no.
God. And
Right.
so people can go, oh, it's God. But
Yeah,
it
and that's what
wasn't
makes it so
really
brilliant.
God. Right,
Because now you can come to the document and say, oh, that's the triune God.
right.
And the theist can come to the document and say, that's just the one God.
Right.
And the deist can come to the document and say, well, that's just the God who wound everything up and then went off to do something else.
Right.
But he needed that transcendent reference point so that he could get inalienable rights. Rights that trumped the divine right of kings. So I'm going way off topic here.
Specifically to me, it's a right that can never be taken away.
Right, exactly. And why we have those first 10 amendments to the Constitution. That was, whether you like them or not, right? That's secondary. It was brilliant to do that, I think. Again, just at the horizontal level of trying to erect a society that could cherish freedom but have some sense of order. Majorities don't rule in the United States in every situation. That was a tremendous insight, in my opinion. I'll be like Scotty. Do you still always flailing, right?
Yeah.
So, I say all this to say that Rosenberg's term, core moralities, does not even begin to resemble what a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim would likely hear when that term is used without any context. And just this morning, when I was scanning the headlines with my Father's Day coffee cake, there was a little note about a Christian and Muslim alliance in a community, both responding in agreement to certain gay pride events. Well, they're a strange bedfellows. But in a pluralistic society where sectionalism and factionalism becomes something of a political necessity, that makes sense, right? Because they do agree, that is, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, at least if they are observant in any way, do agree on transcendent laws, and therefore they can enter into these otherwise very strange alliances for their community's sake, right? So, if a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim hears the word morals, they are most likely going to hear, oh, that is a monotheistic source for laws, for conduct. The one God has imposed on all people everywhere and at all times. And once you collect all those laws together, we call it God's law. Rosenberg, meanwhile, uses this phrase and intends a collection of morals that originated with natural selection. So they didn't come from God, they came from, figuratively speaking, Charles Darwin. Now, I'll close with this. Let me stress that Rosenberg sees the problem, as so many commentators and social media influencers do not. They simply ignore the problem, and so he must struggle to find a satisfactory solution for all of us. So he says in one place, of course there is no God. We've taken him out of the conversation, and he's rejecting the problem posed by Plato. Is a norm morally correct because God chose it? Or is it morally correct and therefore God chose it? Because it was already correct. So he says, that's out of the question. But science faces a similar problem. Natural selection gave us morality, and it gave us the right morality, it seems. So how did that happen? The question can't be avoided. We can't take seriously the idea that core morality is both correct and fitness maximizing, and then claim that these two facts have nothing to do with each other. That's about as plausible as the idea that sex is fun and sex results in reproduction, but those two facts have nothing to do with each other. Is natural selection so smart that it was able to filter out all the wrong, incorrect, false core moralities and end up with the only one that just happens to be true? Or is it the other way around? Natural selection filtered out all but one core morality, and winning the race is what made the last surviving core morality the right, correct one. He says, which is it? His answer is, it can't be either one. The only way out of the puzzle is, drum roll, nihilism. Our core morality isn't true, right, correct, and neither is any other. Nature just seduced us into thinking it's right. It did that because that made core morality work better. Our believing in its truth increases our individual genetic fitness. He goes into some detail to explain why neither of the two choices is correct. I don't want to take the time to go through all of that. I'll say it makes its own kind of sense. I'll jump forward to his conclusion, and then we'll close. And then we'll get to his objections to those persistent beliefs that he outlined in the beginning. Scientism cannot explain the fact that when it comes to the moral core, fitness and correctness seem to go together. But neither can it tolerate the unexplained coincidence. So he concludes, and he puts this in italics, we have to give up correctness. We have to accept that core morality was selected for, but we have to give up the idea that core morality is true in any sense. Do you see the stress he's operating under here? And I appreciate that he's actually working it out. Of course, obeying core morality is convenient for getting our genes copied in the next generation, which is why we exist, right? That's fundamental. Just getting our genes into another circle or cycle of life is why we exist. Useful for enhancing our fitness, a good thing to believe if all you care about is leaving a lot of offspring. If core morality is convenient, useful, good for any fitness-maximizing creature in an environment like ours to believe, then it doesn't matter whether it is really true, correct, or right. If the environment had been different, another moral core would have been selected for. Perhaps even the dog-eat-dog morality of Herbert Spencer, advocated under the mistaken label of social Darwinism. That's where that phrase, the survival of the fittest, comes from Spencer. It's probably not a dead-on accurate way to describe Darwin, but it wouldn't have been made right, correct, or true by its fitness in that environment. So, that's where he goes. Give up the idea of correctness altogether and simply acknowledging the fitness maximizing of this core morality in the environment like ours.
So he's arguing that nihilism is our solution to avoid bullying and all these other things you were just in your analogy of two sets of rules.
Right. Yeah, and he's saying basically nihilism can be a good thing.
Otherwise we're headed for these things.
Right, we need the rules, but we've already divorced ourselves from the traditional source. We can't make them up as we go, or we can't have 15 different sets competing in the marketplace if we want a cohesive society. So this is the direction we should head in. Again, what I appreciate about this is he's not pulling a fast one like Dawkins and assuming the conventional liberal morality. Instead, he's facing this more directly and saying, this is what we've got to work with, now let's make the most of it. All right? Yes, one more.
I was going to say, ultimately, these atheists are coming to the conclusion that they like science until they don't like science, because their position inexorably leads to a fatal flaw that's unworkable. So they have to do contortions and lies and hypocrisies to patch it up.
Yeah, I don't know if I would put it that harshly. Atheism has been heading here for a very long time, right? What makes Rosenberg's position slightly different is the way he's pushing forward scientism as the source of constructive life values. So it's not simply it's not existentialism, right? Where existence precedes essence. It's not make up your own, right? It's scientism has done the best possible job of creating the environment in which we exist. Let's appeal to it for those rules. They're not right, true, transcendent in any traditional historical sense, but let's appeal to those rules now for moving forward in a common morality.
But he has departed from science because he's entering the realm of philosophy now.
He would say he's not.
But to say there is no God, there is no scientific proof either way, so that's philosophy.
Yeah, I get that. I'm really highlighting parts from his book. I think his argument demonstrates an honesty and a consistency. A lot of people in his world don't like this book, right? I'm not saying this is representative of But it is, in my opinion, the outworking of some existing ideas, and he's just calling it like it is. All right, let's prepare for worship.